You're listening to The Deep End. Today, we're honored to be joined by one of the most iconic figures in the field, Professor Mathes-Nahai, who is internationally recognized as a pioneer in both aesthetic and reconstructive surgery, with a career that spans continents and decades of innovation. A graduate of Bristol in the UK, he built much of his distinguished career at Emory University in Atlanta, where he trained generations of surgeons and helped shape the future of the specialty. He has held some of the most influential positions in our field: past president of the International Society of Aesthetic Plastic Surgery, the American Society for Aesthetic Plastic Surgery, and former director of the American Board of Plastic Surgery. He has also served as editor-in-chief of the Aesthetic Surgery Journal. Perhaps best known for his co-development of the Mathes-Nahai flap classification, and for authoring the definitive, multi-volume text, The Art of Aesthetic Surgery, his influence can be felt in every corner of the specialty. We're incredibly privileged to have him with us today. Let's dive in.
Dr. Nahai, welcome to the Deep End podcast. I'm joined by my co-host, Hank from Penn. Dr. Nahai, it is a distinct and true honor to have you as one of the, incredible figures in our specialty. And as we were kind of talking about earlier, someone who was a leader and founder of many of the things that we read about today in both reconstructive microsurgery and flap surgery, but also very uniquely became one of the top names in aesthetic plastic surgery and editor-in-chief of the Aesthetic Surgery Journal. And a lot of this we will talk about at this podcast tonight. So thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, and nice to meet you both. I'm happy to have this informal chat with you. By way of background, I was born in Iran. Back then, we used to call it Persia. I went to the American school from 8 o'clock in the morning till 3:30. I'd come home at 3:30, have lunch, and then my father insisted that I should be fluent in Farsi, Persian, know all about the Persian culture. So we'd have a private tutor for 2 hours every day, so that I had the equivalent of middle school education in Farsi. I can still read and write in Farsi. And my parents instilled in me a sense of humility. They instilled in me honesty, decency, don't ever lie. But what I learned most from them, which has helped me throughout my career, was they taught me to show the same respect to our household help as I did to my uncles and aunts. Very early on, they chose to send me with my brother, to send me to England to boarding school. I thought I was proficient in English, but it wasn't British English. So several years in boarding school in England, I learned discipline, I learned self-sufficiency, I learned sportsmanship, but most of all, I learned my own limitations. I learned to be self-sufficient. I also learned that given my physique, that I was not going to excel as a sports person. I was not going to win the 100-yard race, but I was doing well in class and gravitated towards medicine, and was lucky enough to get into the University of Bristol in England. And I credit my training in that medical school for where I am today. I came across the professor of medicine who, after my parents and a couple of the, we used to call them masters in boarding school. They were not teachers, they were masters. Apart from a couple of the masters in boarding school, he was really a great mentor to me. He's responsible for me being in the United States. He was also a role model. I liked the way he taught. I liked the respect that he showed to the medical students. But most of all, he said to me once, Nahai, sit down and listen to your patient. They will tell you the diagnosis. Don't rush with blood tests and x-rays.
Mhm.
He taught me about spending time with our patients, and he was instrumental in me doing my senior medical school elective at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. It was a culture shock for me, the pace of life in the United States, the work that medical students did. I was used to a more laid back, leisurely approach as a British medical student to come to Hopkins and in a very competitive environment, get up early in the morning. But that sold me on the American system of surgical education. So once I finished medical school in England, did 1 year of internship there, I actually went back to Hopkins again, did my first 2 years there. After 2 years, I was told that there was no room for me, which I understood to mean they felt I had no academic or leadership potential. They suggested that I go to one of the local private hospitals in Baltimore to finish my training. I went to my advisor, having uh, being very upset and feeling as if I'd been rejected. And he said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I knew this was coming, but I have a few places for you to go and interview." And one of those places was Emory in Atlanta. And as they say, the rest of it is history. Uh, Not staying at Hopkins in retrospect was a blessing. I came to Atlanta as a third year, as a second year resident in general surgery back in the old system, the equivalent of a PGY3, although at the time I was a PGY4. I had to repeat my intern year in the States, and I walked in the first day at Grady Hospital, and I met Dr. Maurice Yukewitz, Louis Vasquez, John Bostwick,
Wow.
John McCraw,
Wow.
and Stephen Mathis, and Jack Fisher was the medical student on that service. So that's how that's how I've ended up where I am. I was fortunate enough to finish general surgery, but when I decided I wanted to be a plastic surgeon, there was no room for me at the time. Emory just took 2 residents, and 2 of my own cohorts, one of which was Stephen Mathis, had been promised those jobs. So I actually interviewed elsewhere, came back, and felt that I really wanted to stay at Emory. At the time, it was the epicenter of what was
Yep.
going on with muscle and musculocutaneous flaps. So we worked out a deal that I would work in the lab and then join the plastic surgery team. In order for me to work in the lab, I had to earn a living. As part of that, I was made an instructor in anatomy, teaching anatomy to the medical students, and at the same time working in the lab. I was and I am a self-taught microsurgeon. I taught myself how to put those vessels together, and I would work with the medical students. When they were gone, I'd do my own work. By way of background, Steve Mathis and John McCraw had already been working on defining the vascular pedicles to various lower extremity muscles. Steve Mathis would take amputated specimens, inject them with red latex dye, and then look at the blood supply. So I had the opportunity in the cadavers to go beyond the lower extremity I looked at muscles everywhere and would talk to Steve. And one day I said to him, Steve, there's a pattern of all the flaps that we use. There seems to be a pattern. So we sat down. I went through what I had found, and he looks at me and he says, I think this is going to be something. So looking back over 4 decades ago, looking back at what started with my, at the time, misfortune, but good fortune that I was put in the lab I was supposed to be there for a year. After 6 months, I went to John Bostwick, who was the number two person.
Hmm.
And I said, John, you know what? I've learned how to put those vessels together. I've done enough with dissecting the muscle flaps. I'm I want to come and do some clinical work. And as it happened, the program had just been approved to have 3 residents. So what was supposed to be a year of research was just 6 months. I was fortunate enough to work with all the people that I just mentioned. There was an environment that Dr. Yukewitz had established at
Hmm.
Emory that you could you could advance the field provided you took good care of your patients. There was no competition. We all shared what we did and what we knew. And as they say, the rest of it is history. I ended up being 6 months behind Steve Mathis, who in general surgery, we were even. He finished and went to St. Louis. Before he went, we decided we're going to write a few books on flaps and reconstructive surgery. He spent a year in St. Louis, and I would travel every month or so, work with him in their anatomy lab there. And this is almost unbelievable. Who's the medical student there who's assigned to take care of me and make sure that I have the cadavers to dissect? None but Grant Stevens,
Oh,
who
wow.
who is a
Wow.
great friend and was equally involved in the Aesthetic Society with me. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
that
Yeah.
takes me to where I was and my early career. I was hired
It's
at Emory as a full-time person. I spent 20 years there, having ascending through the ranks, having tenure as a full professor.
you
I
know, it's
started.
it's pretty I didn't want to interrupt you, but you said it a few of the things that I think are so important. Like number one, I think coming to the United States to a place like Hopkins, having I did my general surgery training there, and with the history of Halsted and surgery and everything, what an amazing experience must it have been for you to that be your first introduction to surgery in the United States. But what you also said that was kind of interesting is even to experience something so devastating at the time where potentially you thought maybe staying there was everything, not then to realize that really your future and your entire career would open up at Emory. But at the time, it's kind of hard to understand that when you're going through something in life. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention is that a lot of your names that you mentioned are near and dear to me because I grew up in Norfolk, Virginia. And Eastern Virginia Medical School is the reason why I went into plastic surgery. Actually, Charlie Horton removed a cyst under my right eye. And John McCraw, unfortunately, we all know that he passed away recently, but up until maybe several weeks before he passed away, he was mentoring me in my early career. But it was also considered one of the epicenters with Julia Terzis, John McCraw, Charlie Horton, Physicians for Peace. And everything that I used to hear at the time was basically it was Emory or Eastern Virginia Medical School. Those were like the two, and correct me if I'm wrong, but those were like, two major places for reconstructive surgery.
Absolutely. And for a number of years, John McCraw would run a flap course
Yes.
in Norfolk. He would put us up at Virginia Beach,
Hmm.
and P.G. Arnold, Steve Mathis, John Bostwick, Dave DeBell, John McCraw himself. We would be doing the dissections, and every year he would invite some outside faculty, international or from the US. You hit on a very good point. My disappointment when I knew that I was not going to make the cut at Hopkins. Uh, One of my heroes is Winston Churchill, and it happened
Yes.
that the Chancellor of the University of Bristol, and actually about a year before he passed away, he came for dinner, and we all had to wear our undergraduate gowns, bow to the top table when he was there. One of his sayings was that success is not permanent, failure is not fatal. It's the will to continue that counts. So I've also been very, very fortunate in my marriage. My wife has always been supportive of my career, and frankly, I wouldn't be where I am if it wasn't for her support and understanding. She actually turned around and said, wherever you want to go, I will follow you. So we ended up at Emory. Early in my
Yeah.
Emory career, I was actually hired as the hand surgeon, the microsurgeon, and I used to say the savior of hopeless cases, the tough, tough reconstructive cases that nobody wanted to touch. That was my beginning at Emory.
Yeah, and Dr. Nahai, one of the reasons why I love doing this is because, I everybody considers you one of the greats. I consider you one of the greats, and it's really refreshing to see when you pull behind the curtain that your path to success wasn't straightforward and there's obstacles and failures and you can still rise to become, what you've become. I think for someone in my position who's in his infancy of my career, it's great for me to see. So I appreciate you being so open about it. And obviously, you're very modest when you talk about it like you had the opportunity or you felt like you were lucky. But starting from when you were growing up and the lessons your parents instilled in you, I think your way about you put you in those positions to make you feel like you were lucky. But I think it really ends up being those who are willing to take the lab job for a year and not match the people who are willing to stay the extra hours. It sounds like it's like luck or whatever, but really it's the people with that grit that they instilled in you that end up getting those opportunities.
I've always felt it's a combination of the two. Coming to Emory when I did, I was at the right place at the right time with the right people. There was no competition, no, this is my thing. You don't go do any dissections. This is my thing. I started it with the dead cadaver legs. So it was the environment, the encouraging environment, the nurturing environment that Maurice Ukewitz established at Emory. He'd only been here a year before I came as a second year general surgery resident. So the Emory Plastics program is relatively young, just turned 50.
Yeah. What's
Yeah.
funny is that if there's one question on every year's in service that I can prepare for, it's the Mathes-Nahai classification of flaps. And I think I still sometimes get it wrong. But
Or if you're
yeah.
a sub-I or an intern and you get pimped, that's the other time it pops up as well.
Let me ask you, do you have the classification memorized, Dr. Nahai?
Absolutely.
I'm not going to ask you now, but okay, that's good to know. So,
Absolutely. And one of the greatest honors of my career, and especially as it came so early, was that Steve Mathis and I won the James Barrett Brown Award
Mhm.
for the best PRS paper in, I think it was 1980 for that paper. And what I'm happy to see, and I'm surprised and happy to see, is 44, 45 years later, it's still valid.
It's extremely valid. The other thing that wanted to kind of backtrack a little bit on is yeah, I have a sweet spot for international medical graduates. I don't, I had the fortune of being born in the U.S., but my parents were both born in Lebanon, and we immigrated to the U.S. when I was young as a kid. But the path for international medical graduates is not easy at all. And oftentimes you have to train overseas and come here with the uncertainty of either repeating your training and potentially having a spot, potentially not having a spot. It sounds like you maybe went through that a little bit. Do you have any advice for international medical graduates?
Oh, absolutely. Back in my days, it was called foreign medical,
Mm.
FMG, foreign medical.
Yeah.
The advice is persevere your dream. It's worth it. If you have to come to the States, start from the beginning again so that you'd be board eligible in whatever specialty you choose. It's worth it in the end because academically, professionally, and being fulfilled as a physician, the opportunities are here in this country. Uh, in retrospect, although nobody told me to my face, I think one of the reasons why I wasn't kept on at Hopkins was because I was not an American graduate. Do I miss it? I actually miss two things. I miss that I'm not regularly seeing my own medical school classmates, although I'm very, very uh, close to my flatmate, the person that I shared an apartment with in medical school. He's now a retired GP. I've kept up with him, but with the others, I've lost touch. And early in my career, it was clear that looking at other plastic surgeons in Atlanta, that their medical school classmates would refer to them. I had no medical school classmates to refer to me. I had my ability to be able to take care of impossible wounds and the fact that I was at a tertiary referral center that helped me build a practice that was initially almost 100% reconstructive, hand, micro, anything that came my way, I would take care of it.
Yeah, that's really really cool. And then what we kind of just touched a little bit upon is the aspect of your career where you were kind of indulging in everything plastic surgery, reconstructive surgery, the Mathes-Nahai classification of flaps, tensor fascia lata flap. But tell me, at the time, did you always kind of have a liking or an interest in aesthetic plastic surgery? I know it kind of all fits together. But I think what's so unique about you is that, as I mentioned before, you are still remembered in all aspects of reconstructive plastic surgery, but also cross the bridge to aesthetic surgery to be one of the biggest names in our lifetime. So did you always have that strong interest in aesthetic surgery?
The quick answer is yes. And as I went through general surgery at Emory, as was typical of the time, you kept quiet about the fact that you wanted to
Yes.
go into plastics. And
Hank.
be,
Yeah.
being hired as a reconstructive surgeon full time at Emory, I had to I didn't have to hide my interest in aesthetic surgery, but I had to make sure that what I was hired for was primary. And the model will not work again, will not work today, but it worked well for me because you do reconstructive surgery, you do cleft lip and palate on a
Mhm.
child, you do an otoplasty, and the mother says, "Do you do plastic surgery? Can you do this?" So very slowly, I was able to build an aesthetic practice and at the same time, as the division of plastic surgery at Emory grew and younger individuals came in. I handed over hand surgery to one of them. Later on, I handed a lot of the reconstructive because now I was being sought after more for the aesthetic than the reconstructive. So that took that path. And as I mentioned, I had 20 years full time at Emory with tenure as a professor. And then my cohort, Rod Hester, felt that there was no future for aesthetic surgery in an academic institution. And we're talking about 1993. So he and I went and looked at a space in Buckhead, which is the affluent area in Atlanta. And it was going to be the Emory Aesthetic Center. John Bostwick came and looked at it. Then at the last minute, Emory decided they were not going to do that. So Rod Hester left on his own. A year later, Mark Codner joined him. Mark was a resident of ours at the time. Sonny McCord, an oculoplastic surgeon, joined. 5 years later,
Wow.
feeling that in an academic institution with no commitment to aesthetic surgery, that I was not providing the best for my patients. Uh, I said to one of the administrators, we're charging Ritz-Carlton prices for my aesthetic patients, but we're giving them Motel 6 treatment, and this doesn't work. So Rod Hester and I, Mark Codner, and eventually my own son joined us in that practice for 15 years. Rod decided to retire, and the only purchaser we found for the practice was Emory. So I go back
Wow.
full time at
Wow.
Emory doing exclusively aesthetic surgery. There were actually four of us there. I'm sure you've heard of Monty Eves, who trained at Emory. Monty came back. His wife, Gabby Miyota, was with us, and another Emory trained plastic surgeon. The four of us did nothing but aesthetic surgery. We had 7 great years until one day the chair of the Department of Plastic Surgery walks in and says, "We don't need full-time aesthetic surgeons anymore." So in and out of Emory again. By then, my son, who decided not to stay when Emory took over the practice and actually said to me, "Dad, I know you've always loved academics. The residents love you. This is where you'll end your career, but I'm going to go into private practice." So from 2020 till now, I'm in private practice with my son. Over the years, though, I've been of the opinion that academics is a state of mind. And
Yes.
I remember saying this to Jack Fisher when he decided to leave the Mayo Clinic and join Pat Maxwell in Nashville. Jack said to me, "Ford, if I leave academics, will you still be my friend?" I said, "Jack, I'm always going to be your friend, but look back. Look back. You mentioned Charlie Horton, that entire Eastern Virginia group, private practice." I said, "Look at Pat Maxwell himself." And then I said, in Atlanta, look at Carl Hartram. Carl came up with the idea of the tram flap. And interestingly, my very first rotation as a plastic resident was with Carl Hartram. We were doing an abdominoplasty, and he got one of those perforators, and he says, "You clever people, you think you could put these vessels together?" I said, "I think so, but it'd be much easier to carry the vessel with the muscle underneath." And as they say, that the rest of that is history.
Wow. You go ahead, Hank.
I was just gonna say, so fast forward a little bit. Obviously, now you've become super prominent in aesthetics. You became head of the ASJ, the Aesthetic Surgery Journal. Can you tell me how that came about and what you're most proud of leading that journal to now becoming one of the biggest, if not the biggest, aesthetic surgery journal?
Uh, Interestingly, as my practice was shifting from reconstructive to aesthetic, I decided to join the Aesthetic Society. And I remember Dr. Yukewitz saying to me, "You're already a member of the association. Why do you want to join that group?" I said, "Dr. Yukewitz, I'm doing a lot of aesthetic surgery. I'm teaching your residents aesthetic surgery. I think I can learn." So I became involved with the Aesthetic Society, became involved in the leadership of the Aesthetic Society. I was very good friends with Stan Klatsky, who I succeeded as editor. At the time, the journal was not indexed, and actually, once they appointed me to succeed Stan Klatsky in January, the previous October, finally the journal was indexed, but we had no impact factor. So it was a labor of love for me. I love the Beatles. I grew up in England with the Beatles. In medical school, I'd study at night and listen to the Beatles. And now, when I'm doing a facelift and I hear all those old tunes, it takes me back. So, 8 days a week, my passion was the journal, 24 hours, 8 days a week. It took anywhere from 2 to 4 hours a day of my time.
Mm.
Uh, I don't like to use the word proud because pride has some self-serving connotations. So what I'll say is I'm happiest about some of the things that I've done. One of them is working with the journal, which became a passion. I put a lot of energy into it. I didn't do it alone. We had a good team. I had support of the Aesthetic Society. Jeff Kinkle was my uh, associate editor. We had an incredible editorial team, supportive staff, and I have to admit again, right place, right time. Aesthetic
I don't
surgery
believe it.
aesthetic surgery was exploding, and through my personal connections in the country and internationally, I was able to twist a few arms and get some of the notable people to start sending their best material to ASJ. Rod Rorick was an incredibly competitive person to he'd get to people before I would get to them. He and I have
Yes.
been friends ever since he was a resident. So we had that sense of competition, who's going to get which paper. It was a joy, but it was also hard work. Uh, now that I
I think that brings the best out of each other. You know, it's kind of like a Larry Bird, Magic Johnson situation where the two like competitors make each other better, and they even if there's some tough times, you admire each other and respect each other at the end of the day. And of course, you also authored and edited The Art of Aesthetic Surgery. So you have your name, like we were alluding to earlier, on the reconstructive side, on the aesthetic side of things. You're at the top of both. As a lot of listeners and a lot of our audience may be interested in pursuing an aesthetic career or a cosmetic career. What advice do you have to them? How can they become the best cosmetic or aesthetic surgeon that they can be? What would you recommend? And I know you taught yourself microsurgery and probably aesthetic surgery too, but for the normal folk, what would you recommend?
Yeah, do you think to piggyback off of that,
Yeah.
a lot of what people are talking about these days is, do you need an aesthetic fellowship? And also the additional, should there be additional certification in cosmetic surgery? Now we have competition from people even outside of plastic surgery doing cosmetic surgery, which is a whole other topic in itself. But to add to what Hank said, do you think you should have a fellowship? Should there be additional certification or board certification? What are your thoughts on that?
two very, very good questions. The first one, you asked me about advice. The advice I would give to anyone in training: be the best reconstructive surgeon, learn your anatomy. I've talked about putting together tiny blood vessels. Working around the canthus is not easy. It's fraught with a lot of complications, as mild as chemosis and as serious as lid retraction. And I always tell our fellows, I'm comfortable around here because I used to work on tiny little vessels. Knowledge of anatomy, be it the perforators for a DIEP flap or the anatomy of the facial nerve, its relationship to to a deep plane facelift, although I hate to use that term, it's become a marketing tool. So that would be the first thing. I do feel very strongly that a fellowship is a very good thing to do for anyone interested in aesthetics. What I have found I've been involved in the training of about 115 Emory plastic residents and about 40 fellows. And in interviewing individuals for our fellowship, everybody's happy with breast surgery. That's not an issue. Liposuction, not an issue. But it's facial aesthetic surgery, oculoplastics, rhinoplasty, and that's why I feel that to build a successful aesthetic practice today, it's essential to have a fellowship. Pick a fellowship that complements what you saw and did in your own training. I don't think any resident finishing the Emory program would want to go into a fellowship that's strong in breast surgery. I would probably say the same thing about your program, but facial aesthetic surgery, yes. The question of certification is a delicate one. As someone who served on the American Board of Plastic Surgery, as someone who witnessed an attempt probably over 20 years ago to establish the American Board of Aesthetic Plastic Surgery, there was a lot of divisive issues at the time. And actually, the good that came out of that is that the American Board of Plastic Surgery started to embrace aesthetic surgery. At the time, the board was entirely academics, entirely reconstructive. I shouldn't say entirely, I say majority. So the board opened up to aesthetic surgeons. The board changed some of the requirements, and interestingly, as I'm sure you both know, or Dr. Davis, you will find out, is that for recertification, the most popular module is aesthetics. But to quickly answer your question, I've not been on the board since 2006. I don't know the thinking of the ABPS. I don't want to preempt them or suggest that they do anything. But I would think rather than board certification, a certificate of added competence, just like we have with
for the hand.
orthopedic hands. And I know that my colleagues in craniofacial have given some thought to that, but I think that's the way it needs to go. I'd love to see aesthetic plastic surgery still be part of the plastic surgery family, not go have their own board, but work with our board for a certificate. The best that we have available now are the fellowships that are endorsed by the American Society of Aesthetic Surgery. The certificates that we give to our fellows have the society logo, they have the practice logo, and that's about the only thing we currently have. A board may come in the future, but I would see a lot of divisiveness within our specialty and a lot of resistance on on the part of the ABPS and maybe even at ABMS, but I think the certificate makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I think the dedicated year of training in a fellowship is will certainly be beneficial. And your comments about the divisiveness within our specialty, I think Hank and I, one of the things that we so much enjoy about this podcast is that our specialty is so divided by subspecialized conferences. Next week I'm going to a microsurgery conference because that's my specialty. I will never see or hear what the aesthetic surgeons are doing. But what this podcast, one of the initial goals was to bring together aesthetic surgeons, to bring together hand surgeons, bring together reconstructive surgeons, and to kind of reunite our specialties so that we can all learn and hear from each other. And so I love hearing everything you have to say is specific to aesthetic surgery and the future of aesthetics. I kind of know what you're gonna say a lot about the kind of the right time, the right place, but looking back on your it's such an impressive career. Is there anything that you could say looking back, I wish I had done this, or I wish I could go back and do this differently? Is there anything you could advise us, or advise the audience?
It, it may seem it's not a huge regret, but I know at times I've relied on a fellow or a resident to write something up. It's never been done. And then years later, actually, I just went through a manuscript from 1995, endoscopic neck surgery for platysma bands and submandibular gland, which the manuscript was given to me. I don't think we ever published it. When my own son was our fellow, and I had him look up and present at the Aesthetic Society in 2005 the work that we had been doing with the submandibular gland and the deep plane of the neck. It was presented, never published. A year or two, we put it in a book chapter. And now there's incredible interest in the deep plane of the neck, working on the submandibular gland, working on the digastric. None of it is new. This was all done years ago. Credit goes to Bruce Connell, who actually came up with the idea of working deep in the neck to recontour it. So anytime you have a good idea, don't postpone writing. And I've had, especially when I was editor of the journal, many friends from across the world writing to me, I have this idea. And I would say, well, this is what you need to do. Make sure this is how you structure your paper. But my English isn't good. Will you help me? I said, my plate is full, but I can recommend you put your ideas down, and there's a lot of English language editors who will be able to put that in there. So anytime you have a good idea, anytime you have a presentation and you're asked to write a paper, don't postpone it. Take the time, write it, and do it. Uh, the regret that I have, and this is a personal one, and I think for the young individuals who's listening, uh, my daughter was married. She had two younger children, 6 and 4. I took them to the movies. First time granddad took his children to the movies. I came back. We went to my daughter's house. I went in and she said, Daddy, would you like to have a cup of tea? I said, sure. I loved spending time with your kids. As we're having the cup of tea, she says, Daddy, you know what? I'm very, very happy. You're watching my kids grow up, but you never saw your own children grow up. And that got me
Ouch.
that got me right here. So that is a regret. As I
Mhm.
said, I've been very, very fortunate. I've had a very supportive wife. Uh, she basically almost single-handedly raised the kids. never blamed or said your dad is never here, although weekends and the evenings that I'd get home early, I would insist that we have a family dinner and talk
Mhm.
about their day, talk about my day. But that's a regret I have. And it reminds me of one of the pioneers of microsurgery, Bob Ackland,
Mm-hmm.
who devised the Ackland
Ackland
clamp.
clamp.
I, he and I became friends. He had trained in the UK. And actually, the lab where he developed that clamp at St. Mary's Hospital, Swindon, England. Swindon is only about 25 miles east of Bristol, where I went to medical school. So I remember Bob Ackland giving a lecture at the ASRM, the American Society for Reconstructive Microsurgery, and had a picture of a steam engine going full blast, and then tragedy. He said his marriage broke up because, like a steam engine, he was focused and going. So, uh, for me, it worked out until my daughter told me you didn't see your own kids grow up. I'm glad you're seeing your grandchildren grow up. Uh, both our children turned out very well. My marriage is still intact after 55 years. And so
Yeah.
I was fortunate. So any regrets? Yes, I should have spent more time at home. I should have said on a Saturday or a Sunday, instead of traveling to St. Louis, work with Steve on the book, or go to San Francisco. Maybe I should have spent more time with my kids. So, in a way, it's a regret, but it's not a regret that uh, cost me dearly, other than emotionally looking back.
No, you're right. And I mean, to hear something like that from you, particularly for our audience, is so important for Hank and myself. And I have three young girls, gonna have a fourth girl. And like you said, you get caught on, I think of it as a treadmill. You just get caught on that treadmill and it's go, 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 and you really have to figure out how to make time for what's also very important in life. So Hank and I tend to end these podcasts with a couple of quick kind of fun questions, but I just want to say how special this whole podcast has been. I mean, it's I've heard so many incredible things, not only just of your career, but just you as a person. And I've learned so much just about even life in this short recording with you. So I can't thank you enough. And a lot of it has to do, you talked about your passion for the ASJ. And as John Cameron also always used to say, if you love what you do, you really never work a day in your life. And combining that with your love for your family, your love for your kids, um, and how special your wife has to be, because those are the unsung heroes that really guide us and support us to do special things in our lives. And without them, it really, there would be nothing. But with our kind of the closing couple of questions, I'll ask one and then Hank will ask the other one. Do you listen to any music in the operating room? You mentioned the Beatles.
Oh, absolutely. Actually, I wrote an editorial about music in the operating room for ASJ. I used to listen to Mozart because doing microsurgery, I had to focus. So Mozart was great. Dr. Ukewitz always felt that the operating room is hallowed ground. You shouldn't listen to music. And one day he said, I hear you listen to music. I said, yes, Dr. Ukewitz, but it's Mozart. So that was fine. Now it's anywhere from the Beatles, Elton John, Frank Sinatra, uh, any of the contemporaries that I can
Mhm.
listen to, because I don't need to concentrate as much as I used to early in my
Yes,
career doing microsurgery. But yes, I do listen to music.
that's good to know.
That's awesome.
Hank.
Yeah, and also I just want to say, just to piggyback off of Saeed, that it's so special just, documenting this, especially for us. I learned so much from you and how, lessons for me to bring throughout the rest of my career, but I think also our listeners are this is a documented history that people will learn from and really value your opinion and stuff. So thank you again so much for joining us. But my last question is, what's your favorite surgical instrument?
Oh, wow. When I did microsurgery, obviously it was the Ackland clamp, but my favorite was what I called my micro mosquitoes. Very, very fine tipped, and I would use that as a guide when I would assist the resident in dissecting the pedicle, preparing the recipient vessels. And I felt that it was the conductor's stick that I would put this and spread and say, you cut here, you cut here, you cut here, so that the resident felt they were doing the case. But really, the conductor with that micro mosquito was doing the case. In aesthetic surgery, I have a pair of pickups that I call my pickups, and the Snowden pincer, which is now Black and Black, is based in Atlanta. And at the time in 1993, when Monty Eves got us interested in endoscopic plastic surgery at Emory, we worked with then Black and Black, and Monty and the other residents designed some endoscopic instruments, and I had them design a pickup for me that I use on every facelift that I do. And I give a copy of it. I give one to every fellow who finishes their training. With Black and Black calls it the Nahai pickups. I call it my pickups.
I love that. It's awesome.
I love that. I'm going to try to do one more thing before we end this call. I wanted to share my screen with you. Let me see if I can do that here. Can you see my screen, Dr. Nahai?
Yes.
Can you
Oh
see
my
this?
goodness, look at that. Bob Ackland.
This is the faculty.
You have the year?
This is 1978.
Wow.
So clearly Norfolk, Virginia holds a very close place in my heart and the rich plastic surgery history there. But this is, I think, one of the original flap courses there. So anyways, I thought that you'd find it interesting.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing it.
And there's another page to this list, but I don't actually see it. Well, thank you again for such a wonderful, wonderful night. This was really, 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 really great. I can't thank you enough.
Nice to meet you both.
Nice to meet you as
Electronically, I
well.
hope
Nice to meet
I
you.
hope we'll meet in live meeting one day. Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
Have a good night.
Have a wonderful
good
night.
night.
Take care.
Bye.